Thank you very much, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, as the host, I feel partially responsible for catching up with the time schedule. Our speakers who follow us, Mr. Konrad Romik and Mr. Antonio Avenoso, please be calm. You will get your allocated portion of time. I will make sure that in my presentation, written together with Professor Jamros, to just show you the time framework and time perspective that we are in at the moment. We are finalizing the 4th National Road Safety Program. We are almost finished. So we're at the point where we should and can evaluate that program and also demonstrate where we can be and what the time frame is in terms of the fatalities and the general goals of the next following road safety program. I understand that Mr. Konrad Romik will tell us a little more about what the National Road Safety Council plans. Me with the professor are just going to say what can be expected in terms of forecasting. So we'll be talking more about mathematics purely. Well, it's not really mathematics per se. There is a little bit of economics in it, because I'll allow myself to relate to the situation now, the so-called pandemic. You all know that the pandemic shows to people who are critical about certain phenomena and demonstrates to them that the things that we are discussing can happen. So what happened in Sweden in 1963 when they were switching from left-hand side traffic to right-hand side traffic, and suddenly it happened that from day 0 to day 1 the number of fatalities dropped to 0, to nil. It later came back to a certain level, but it is possible, showing that it is possible. In the deep lockdown, early April, the first half of April, there were practically no roads. There was no road traffic, there were no cars out. There were no serious accidents. So from the point of view of theory, this is possible. From the point of view of practice, this is also possible. The question is, how do we maintain the same level with normal conditions? Because obviously we don't want to introduce a lockdown. Coming back to a few years earlier, when I was writing my PhD on how economic activity affects road safety, and then the discussion during the defense of my thesis was purely theoretical, because we could not imagine that it could happen. If people are less active, they travel less, they expose themselves less to risk, then we have less casualties and fewer losses. So the challenge is to maintain the same result under normal living conditions, because that's what we want. We want to live under normal conditions, not under lockdown. Let's switch slides. I'm not well coordinated. I couldn't be a musician. Thank you. I will show you two graphs. The first one relates to fatalities. The second, on the next slide, let's wait with this, will show you seriously wounded, seriously injured. This here is the changing trends. In the course of the 4th National Road Safety Program, that's for fatalities and seriously injured, and then there is the goal, no more than 2,000 fatalities by 2030. It looks like we're not going to achieve this goal. We can already say that, because the data that you see, and let me add it, this is quarterly plotting, we're not going to achieve that, because halfway through the National Road Safety Plan, it turned out that the trend, which initially was positive, later stabilized and stagnated at the level of 3,000 fatalities. And it was only the pandemic in the past 2 quarters showed us that if we survived until December 2020 under pandemics, we could probably have 2,400 fatalities. Let's look at the next slide. It's the same plot for seriously injured. The goal of the national program was 7.4 thousand, no more than 7.4 thousand. Here the situation is even more difficult than in casualties, because from the beginning, throughout the program, we failed to improve the situation. This is a systemic challenge. We have to find out why the number of seriously injured remains stagnant. We see that it's 10,000 to 11,000 seriously injured. The pandemic situations could slow it down a little, so there will be some effect, but as we know, the lockdown will go and the problem will stay with us. Why is this happening? Let's look at the next slide. Despite the goodwill of many people who are strongly dedicated to improving road safety, still we do not have a systemic approach, a holistic approach that would be very strongly supported by subsequent governments. We still have a problem with pedestrians, the vulnerable participants of traffic, pedestrians, cyclists, young drivers. Low level of infrastructure. Now, we have improvements here, but still we have a lot of needs in terms of maintenance of this infrastructure. So we do not have a systemic speed management. In this area, I think we're actually going backwards to a large extent. This is related to low safety culture. But let's not complain. We're just before the fifth National Road Safety Program is going to be announced. As a scientist, we attempted a forecast. That forecast was based on the scenario methodology. We used medium and long forecasting periods, and we took into account demographics, social factors, transport infrastructure, and economic factors. Based on that, we created four scenarios. The first one is the optimistic one. I'll explain it in greater detail in a moment and show you a slide. The second one is balanced scenario, the third is stagnation scenario, and scenario 4 is pessimistic. Let's move on to the next slide. You can see that the stagnation scenario is, that's the blue line. That's scenario S2. What would happen if we did nothing? I'm sorry, stagnation is the purple one. The purple one says what would happen if we did nothing. It turns out that by 2030 we would be at the median European Union level. So that's not the scenario that's not our goal. That's not what we expect. The optimistic one is orange. This is a scenario in which by 2030 we could go down to no more than 660 casualties, 630 casualties. And the pessimistic scenario was by 2030 we could expect a little more than 2,100 casualties. We've assumed, fatalities. We've assumed that, and we'll be recommending that to Mr. Romik for the next program, that achievable is the balanced scenario, the blue line, no more than 1,200 fatalities in 2030. As I said, I'm not going to take a lot of time, so let's have a look at let's skip the next two slides. I will not be explaining them. Now, this is what I just said in table form. If we, depending on the scenario which takes place, these are the figures we could be expecting. Fatalities projected for 2030. Obviously, we would prefer to achieve the optimistic scenario, but as Mr. Minister said, we are realists, and let's adopt the balanced scenario and the balanced forecast.
I tutaj właśnie zapisaliśmy, że w tym drugim punkcie, że
So,
podstawowe wyzwanie
in the
do tego
second
narodowego
point,
programu
the main challenges for the National Road Safety Program, we suggest no more than, based on the balanced scenario, 1,200 fatalities, which is 50% less than the forecast for 2020, which would be 2,400. So almost exactly half.
Założenie celów to jest jeden z bardzo ważnych
Assumptions for the goal, that's one of the very important stages in creating a program. We need to establish some measurable goals so we can use those to monitor progress and make decision makers accountable for what was done and was not, also make ourselves accountable. But just achieving the goals does not change anything in itself. In order for the program to be successful, we've been repeating that for 25 years now. Professor Krystek, Professor Jamros, Professor Gaca, they've all been saying that we'll never do anything without strong political will, consistent, unanimous, such that does not change with the changes in the environment, in the surrounding. The strong involvement of research teams and research institutions. I'm sure that our foreign partners will confirm that road safety-related institutions are involved, but what is missing usually is putting it all together. To develop the 5th National Road Safety Program, that's an obvious point, and to appoint a leader. I don't know if Mr. Antonio Avanoso would talk about it, maybe Konrad Romig will talk about this, but we need to appoint a leader, i.e. a competent lead authority, an institution that will have all the capabilities of acting, of making decisions, and of working consistently. This is of very high importance. If we look at countries that were successful at improving road safety, this was a very strong element in the strategy. Next slide. The necessary strategic actions in the next decade. We are focusing on what was already mentioned also by the Minister: pedestrians, infrastructure, and systemic approach to monitor speed, to limit speed. This is also related to safe designing of junctions and the development of systemic automatic speed supervision and supervision of monitoring of reckless driving. Now, another element that we all have to cope with is the issue of vulnerable road users, especially senior citizens. We have to keep in mind the demographics. The society is becoming older, and we can use modern technology and build them into traffic solutions, because we will have an increasing, in addition, we'll also have an additional of increased number of electric and autonomous vehicles. So we have to make sure that the program takes that into account. Friendly infrastructure, friendly mobility, and overall mobility management. Also, new ideas in urban planning, like, for instance, reintroducing, giving the streets back to the inhabitants. We have to take all that into account, because the road users, especially in large urban centers, are actually asking for that. They are voicing this as their need. They need that to live more safely and more comfortably. The development of road traffic management system, management tools. As Mr. Minister said, we are ready to create the final product, the end product for the managers. So we go beyond recommendations, but actually give the road managers a product that they can take and put in action. And also develop a system of monitoring. And here the universities are well prepared to do that. As a university, we are supporting these actions, and we're ready at any time to support to all those who do it in practice at various levels of administration and management in Poland. And finalizing, I'd like to refer to the pandemics which we are going through worldwide for many years now. Professor Krystek, during his lectures, even back when I was a student attending those lectures, he did say that road traffic is a global pandemic. Road safety, road hazards are a global pandemic. At that time, we didn't really understand what that meant, because that does not mean just the perspective that people die. So if we have a pandemic of flu, people die, so dangerous traffic also kills people. But that's only one aspect, which is very obvious. What we did learn in the past months is that, indeed, actions, individuals wearing masks won't change anything. In pandemics, there have to be systemic global actions. They need to support individuals and they need to meet individual needs, but action has to be taken at the level of government and international bodies. Doing it jointly, doing it with respect, only then we'll be able to cope with pandemics. Thank you very much.